Throwaway time. What's your secret that could literally ruin your life if it came out? Viewers edition. Story 1. You know, my now girlfriend, let's call her JW, was in an extremely similar, if not exactly the same situation before she met me as the story from 1433. She didn't like the people she hung out with in middle school at the time, but due to the fact she had nobody else to go to, she stayed. They'd be total witches to her regularly, and she wasn't as happy and joyful as I was, and still am, so used to seeing her as is. Fast forward to November 2016, I moved to the same school district and have absolutely no friends for that very reason. First person I met was one of her toxic friends, unknowingly, and being the hyperactive extrovert I was, made a total fool out of myself. I remained in classes alone and silent as I went from hyperactive extrovert to semi-introvert in a matter of 1 or 2 weeks. Then one fateful day, I'm in Spanish class, and we had a group project. As luck would have it, JW and I were placed in a group together, and we instantly clicked. And by instantly, I mean instantly. We became extremely close friends for 6 years. Jessie cut ties with her toxic friends, who despised me with a passion, and even tried separating her and I to no avail. And she and I made new friends. She became the playful, lovable, hyperactive weirdo I've known her as since we met. Despite the school's rumors of us dating, we didn't have any feelings for each other, or so I believed. So we both tried having relationships with different people. I had long-distance ones, didn't last. What people say is definitely true. While she got extremely toxic boyfriends. I despised all of them with a passion. As it turns out, my reasoning for hating each of her boyfriends so much was because of a jealousy I was completely unaware of, and I had feelings for her, but was in denial. She actually had feelings for me since we met, but pushed it down as she was too shy to admit it, and tried distracting herself with other relationships. In the end, I took her to prom, was crowned prom king to my utter amazement and confusion, as I had no idea what was going on at the time. Amazing night nonetheless. At the time this is posted, we've been in a relationship for approximately 5 or 6 months and still going strong. My girlfriend had a very bad school life before I came along, became friends instantly, both our school lives improved, denied liking each other, dated 6 years later in senior year, relationship going strong. Sorry if my story seems a bit confusing at points, I'm not exactly the best at explaining things. I also understand this has nothing to do with the actual question of the video, but that specific timestamp reminded me a lot of this. Story 2. On the rag and the water heater story, it's what happens when landlords try to save a couple dollars. I did HVAC repair and installation. In my state, homeowners can do HVAC in their own home, provided they get a permit from the government and have the work inspected by a government inspector. Landlords are not permitted to do HVAC in their rentals. The work must be done by a licensed professional. Rentals are inspected by the government every 2 or 3 years in most municipalities. The inspectors are pretty good about keeping tabs on what equipment is in what given rental. The rental inspectors don't inspect the HVAC per se, they just keep tabs on what equipment is where. The landlord must have the equipment inspected and certified safe by a licensed professional prior to the government inspection. A landlord who's caught doing HVAC in their rentals is fined and must hire a licensed professional to inspect the equipment. We had an older lady who owned several rentals. She'd always try to do shady stuff and get caught. I'd be sent off the job and find some horrible, life-threatening crap she'd done. She'd then proceed to rant about how I and the government were trying to ruin her. Water heaters produce carbon monoxide that needs to be vented to the outside. One time, she and her son replaced the water heater in a rental. They did it right after an inspection, so it would be a couple years before they were caught. They hooked up the vent incorrectly, and CO was backing into the house. The tenant and her kids started getting flu-like symptoms after the heater was installed. She called the rental inspector called the HVAC inspector, he shut down the water heater, and the rental inspector ordered the landlord to vacate the house until the water heater was repaired. This woman almost ended the lives of her tenants, and had to put them in a hotel for a couple of days. It was winter and people without heat took precedence, so it was a few days before we, or anyone, could get to her. She was fined and had to pay for us to fix her mess. As usual, she screamed bloody red rum about how she was being railroaded by me and the government. All she understood was money, money, money. She also wasn't even shy about asking for a discount. Said she wouldn't make any money if she had to pay full price. We never gave her anything off. Our rate was pretty low. If we gave her a discount, we wouldn't make any money. She still screamed that we were robbing her cheap butt. Story 3. That one with the F off to the dad that ended his own life is similar to my story. My dad was pretty run-of-the-mill dad up until I was about 9 and my parents divorced. I lived with my mother primarily from then on. My dad would virtually not exist for years at a time for maybe a happy birthday message, but every now and again he would ask for a place to stay for a few days, which ended up being months or years, usually unemployed. He was also a problem alcoholic, though he made efforts to get sober. Both my mother and I were getting very annoyed with his always being around and expecting our household operations to run around him. One time, after being there for almost 2 years, he randomly disappeared for several days. We thought he finally found somewhere else. He then showed up about a week later, walked into the house, and passed out. Definitely seemed like after a bender. Bought with a portion of the staggering amount of money he owed my mother. I had to use my lunch break and come home and leave a note for him that said, "When you wake up, you need to get all your stuff out or I'll get it out for you." I came home for several days. Turned out he ended his life in the garage. I've always felt like normal people would feel some guilt from this, but truthfully, I never have. Clearly, he had other things going on in his head that he never communicated with us. One thing I do feel guilty about, though, is the dreams I sometimes have. I'll dream that suddenly my dad's back. There's a brief happiness I feel. Then he immediately goes back to sitting in the recliner and watching TV. And it makes me angry when I see it. I don't have the dreams as much anymore because I feel like my brain has ample acceptance of his unaliveness now, but I've never shared this story and only my mom knows the details, so it feels somewhat relieving to share it. Story 4. I have a secret, but it's not so bad as the stories in here. I feel really bad for them and sorry they had to go through that, and may the ones who are gone, RIP, for the people in the stories. Anyways, here's one of my stories. One of my cousins taught me about making out and stuff. Then they forced me to do it with them, and even if somebody was there, they would tell me to go under the blanket and do it. I thought it was normal, so whenever they came over, they would force me to do it. Later on, I wasn't comfortable and told them, since I found out it was wrong, they said that if we could do it one more time and then they'll stop. We did, but the other time they visited, they tried doing it again, but I told them I didn't want to. Later on, they visited me this year, or last year, I don't remember, but they tried to force me into vaping. They even told me about weird stories in their class about kids jerking off. I was calling my partner once, and they just talked about the things we did when we were younger in front of my partner. I just tried to ignore them, but they got annoyed and just walked out of the room. My partner was quiet the entire time, and we just hung up later on because it was kind of awkward. They still forced me to vape every time I saw them. I haven't seen them for a while now, so I'm not sure if they're still vaping or something, but yeah, whenever I try telling someone, they start talking about their problems or just ignore it and talk about something else. Except for my partner, we aren't together anymore. Also, this happened when I was 6 and ended when I was 9 or 10. Story 5. I've been abused since I was 9, so I can understand how and why they feel. But I've found out if you find a good therapist and tell them about it, once it's out in the open, it's like a ton of garbage has been lifted off your shoulders. You must realize you were a child and had no control over what happened. You were in no way to blame for what happened to you. So you have got to forgive yourself of your false guilt. Then you can start to understand how and why you think the way you do because of the abuses you suffered from your childhood. For me, I found peace within myself, and I've even been able to forgive not only myself for false guilt, but I've also been able to forgive my abusers. I've come to realize that we were young at the time, and not only that, but I came to understand that he was acting out on me, what was being done to him by his uncle. I will say therapy really works. If you're willing to do the work, a therapist can't give you the answers to your innermost emotional feelings, thinking, behaviors, actions, and good or bad choices. For those questions, the answer is within, if you are willing to face them. Sorry for the rant, but it ticks me off when victims blame themselves for something that they had no control over. I know I've been there. I felt the inner pain, self-hatred, false guilt, shame, and the suffering that goes with it. Get help. It's not a crime to seek help. It's only a crime if you don't ask for the help and suffer in silence. Story 6. Hiya, I'm someone who experienced a very, very similar situation to hers, except I'd actively state my objections and he'd manipulate me into easing up and minus the seppuku since he still lives with me. So as someone who was in that situation of being manipulated by an older brother into those types of scenarios as a kid, when you're young and don't realize what's happening in the moment and only realize later after all the years of knowing your brother as well, your brother, your family, someone you do love as your family, someone who lives with you, you don't just go, oh, he did this horrible thing to me, so I hate him now. It seems like the next logical step, even if you know what happened was wrong and that he knew what he was doing and he knew he shouldn't have done that. It's hard to get to the point of hatred because you still have this image in your mind of your brother being anything else but an incestuous pedophile. I've spent many, many years in conflict because I'm angry. I'm angry at what he did. I'm angry about what it's done to me in the long term. And I'm angry at myself because I refuse to take any action to even get him out of the house because I still care about him as my family. And I don't want bad things to happen to him even when I have the perfect opportunity to do so. She definitely should recognize that she was in fact being exploited, but I understand why she views it the way she does. Story 7. I'm the kid nobody notices since I'm the middle child. I have decent enough grades, and there's just so much chaos at home. I left for a day once with a laptop, some money, and a Swiss Army knife, in case of creeps, and just drifted off into the streets at around 7 in the morning under the cover of dawn. Spent about an hour eating breakfast at McDonald's and writing a story on my laptop, then I left. I walked around for the rest of the day, eventually stopping at a park that my family had never been to. I made friends with a few kids that were probably half my age, then got chased off of their turf because they were armed with wood chips, and I didn't want to take a knife out on a bunch of little kids. It was about 5 when I got home and just told my family that I'd been at my boyfriend's house. And I was not surprised when they didn't have any questions about my boyfriend. I only suddenly had. It wouldn't ruin my life now because I told them about this a few months after. My mom just didn't care, and my dad congratulated me for being smart enough to have the knife. That was the day I found out my mom is actually my stepmom. Story 8. Not really, to be honest, no, but I don't feel it necessarily has to be one or the other. A small circle or a triangle is even preferable, but that's easier said than done, especially having gotten used to the freedoms of solitude. But bad experiences or general satisfaction don't take away from the merits of unburdened social interactions or shared experiences. It's a common coping mechanism with which I too am quite familiar. To assume every instance of something is bad or not worth the compromise in comfort zone based on overwhelmingly bad experiences, it's not just safer to try, it's more peaceful to not even want to, right? But I think that's something we convince ourselves of to drown out the quiet back-of-mind voice muttering about FOMO, because we know in a world of 8 billion, finding and holding on to those handful of people who don't make comfortable silences uncomfortable is just as unlikely as admitting we were wrong about not needing them in the first place. It's great that you find peace and solitude, and speaking as someone who does too, just be sure you're really sure that's what you prefer. It's harder to make friends than to lose them, and hindsight is a hell of a drug. Story 9. Regarding story 2, a Spanish guy in my uni tried to pull that stuff with me. He took an article from Spanish Google and then translated it through Google to English and then handed that to me for his part. It was so over the top with how formal it was, and badly translated in some places, and incredibly biased. He gave this thing to me like 6 hours before our deadline in a group of 5 people. He could have ruined the uni career of 5 people, including himself. So I took his work to my lecturers. I don't care if people think it's some kind of snitching. It's pathetic if you do, because I was working really hard for my grade in uni, and then this piece of crap poo-poo gives me something that could have ruined actual years of my life. I told my lecturer, requested that he be removed from the group, and also requested that he doesn't expel the kid, but just fails him instead, so he has to redo the entire group project on his own. Story 10. Okay, so my entire family is religious and homophobic. I'm not an official adult yet, so I have no way of moving out. I'm gender fluid and bi. Every time my family mentions the LGBT community, I freeze. It literally horrifies me. I have LGBTQ friends that I talk to, and they're honestly amazing. Once, while at my friend's birthday party, we went to a cinema, and the parents had gone out of their way to ask the theater to not play the movie that was originally going to play because the lead character was gay. The movie played instead that literal stuff, from the animation to the art style and the plot. The original was actually amazing because I ended up seeing it with my cousin without our parents noticing that this was the movie they were trying to get not to play. Sorry if this was confusing. English isn't my first language. Even though I feel very confident speaking it, I'm a fast typer and often make typos. Haha. Story 11. Regarding story 23, yeah, I also have an imaginary friend. Actually, there's a whole friend group, and I have some cringe stories about that. When I was 15 or 16, I thought I had DID, dissociative identity disorder, which I certainly don't have. It made me feel cool and not alone, like my imaginary friend was valid that way. Probably because I was in a phase when I told everyone about them and had two types of reactions: accusations of lying or tries at diagnosing me. Thought it was better to be mentally unhealthy than to be a liar. Luckily, I grew up and now I'm 19 years old and I understand that it's okay to make up people to talk to. Still feel weird about the whole self-diagnosing DID thing. I know that I didn't know better, but I feel like I should have. Wow, that really does feel better to get things out on the internet. Story 12. Do you prefer complexity, adherence to current social protocols, the complexity associated with multiple people in your life, and the lack of free time? I tried it the way almost everyone does. It was painful, emotionally, very complex, time-consuming, and freedom was just a fond memory. For some, they really do prefer that kind of existence. That's why I asked. For me, it was agony, especially since I ranked low in the social herd that I attended. I'm not sure what sets the pretend ranking in a social herd, nor do I longer care to know. But back then, I could not figure it out. It was not about intelligence, productivity, knowledge, helpfulness, nor discipline that set ranking in a social herd. Perhaps it was negative behavior, not positive behavior. Maybe I should have attempted red rum on someone. Story 13. Okay, so my story is I got curious one day after finding out about femboys, and I decided that I wanted to be one, and so I did. And I embarrassingly had a sit-down conversation with my mom, and she was surprisingly okay with it, and she said next month when we'd get paid, she'd go shopping for specific girls' clothes just for me. And I had the most happiest day of my life. I guess the only downside is it's like Superman in a way. You have the me, which is my Clark Kent side, and my femboy side, which, like Superman's alter ego, is that if anyone finds out, I'm not just scared about what might happen, and that's why I mostly cross-dress in my own house. Story 14. I think it's not because of love, it's clearly lust. It's like teens do, like they say, I love you to each other, ending up in that kind of relationship, only to break up a year or two later. If you love someone in the right mind, especially your family, you would not do something like that. I think he took himself off because he couldn't handle his truth and convinced himself that it was love when it was not. I'm sorry to be harsh, but I think his conscience punished him for it. Everyone lost just because lust overcame him that time. I hope everyone learns something from this and not to let your impulses get the best of you. Story 15. When I was about 10, I lived in a duplex with my family upstairs and the neighboring family downstairs. In the house, there was a door that connected the two apartments hidden behind a shelf. I loved to sneak through the door to hang out with the other children that lived downstairs. I was always welcome to visit. However, one time I snuck through the door and saw the mom cleaning the kitchen with no pants on. I saw her entire downstairs area and then exited ASAP. I'm the only one that knows. Thankfully, we don't live there anymore. I should mention she wasn't wearing panties either. I'm also ace, so it was more scary than anything. Story 16. On the one where the kid was about to shoot the other guys, I understand that. I was in 4th grade and I was bullied 24/7 by a gang of people, and I was broken. There was one time where they did something so bad that I wanted to end their lives. Luckily, I didn't know how I would do it, so I didn't. I'm still suffering and emotionally unalive, but I'm getting over it, and I have a good social life. The moral of the story is you can get over stuff given enough time, and it will be all right. Have a nice day, everybody. Story 17. Yep, as they say, high school doesn't end. Adults get very good at bullying, even able to use the law to help them to do it. Once I got into the workforce, I realized how much I'd been prepared to deal with these people by being bullied. I hated being bullied so much and thought so negatively about it, but man, once I hit the workforce and got bullied there, I was instantly thankful I'd had experiences which taught me how to deal with those situations. Story 18. The one about the imaginary friend is interesting to me. It displays how when you're young and had done something that brought comfort to you, it seeks that feeling, but when it goes away, the brain starts seeking that feeling to the point of desperation, and it will force it to happen again. An example of this is kids who had one of their parents pass away sometimes create an imaginary friend that shares one or more characteristics with that parent. Story 19. Watching this makes me grateful for the people that understood, loved, and protected me, even when I was at my worst. Thanks to them, I didn't end up like those that humiliated, enraged, deceived, and had beaten me. Thanks to them, I kept my empathy, even for those who wronged me. For those who hold no warmth in their hearts, will take it from others, only to find themselves colder than before. Story 20. When I was 6, my 18-year-old brother ended the lives of my parents. They R''d him as a kid, and they were going to start doing the same with me. He made it look like it was a break that went horribly wrong. He became my guardian and protected me until I was 18 and moved out. He never learned that I had always known, as he thought that I was asleep, but heard everything. Story 21. I relate so much to story 23. Ever since I was little, making friends has been extremely difficult for me. I've had the same kind of imaginary friends, and I'm close to 30 as well. I used to do a lot of role-playing on Tumblr, but lost touch with it after losing my favorite writing partner. If I ever feel lonely, I bring up some characters I love. Please leave your stories in the comments. I'd love to make a video of them in the future. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe.